Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by Dr. Alicia Naser. She's the founder and CEO of AN Sports Consulting, specializing in behavioral science and neuroscience to optimize performance for NHL hockey players, coaches, and front office personnel. Over a decade in clinical and hospital settings, including Johns Hopkins Hospital and the University of Nebraska Medical Center, she applies behavior analytic strategies to enhance resilience, confidence, and high-pressure performance for NHL, D1, and junior hockey players. Beyond athletes, she works with coaches and organizations to refine leadership, team dynamics, and culture. A former adjunct professor at Wayne State University, her research explores self-monitoring interventions for reducing self-criticism, optimizing mental and behavioral performance, and enhancing overall well-being. It's a really interesting and fascinating podcast and interview. We speak about everything psychology and the mental side of the game. We speak about confidence, consistency, and how important it is to dot I's and cross T's in that area. We also speak about the environment and how important that environment is in creating good habits and in creating long-term health. It's a really interesting and informative interview. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Doc. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm pumped for this. This is going to be awesome. The goal here with this podcast is to learn, share a positive message and leave the game in a better place. And there's so many things that I'm excited to share with the listeners here about your background. So I want to start, you work with players in the National Hockey League. You work with players in the Ontario Hockey League. Talk to us about your background. How did you get started? How did you marry up behavioral science with performance?
I will. I'll explain. But first, I think we should say thank you to Rob Dombrowski, because I know he's the one who had mentioned me.
He's the man. You know what? I ask every listener or ask every person who they recommend. You were on top of the list.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think it goes to show his expertise in knowing, because what happened is I had a player reach out and they filled out an application to work with me. And when it said, "How did you hear about Dr. Nasser?" there's a space on the application, and it said my strength coach, my strength and conditioning coach. And I looked to see who it was, and it was him. And I think that is something that I hope anybody in the strength and conditioning school of thought and field learns from is knowing when something is maybe outside of your lane and when to reach out for a multidisciplinary approach. So sure. I think that was wonderful, and I was first of all flattered, but I think it's awesome on his end. So thanks to him. So to talk about my background a bit. Yeah. So I am a board certified behavior analyst, and my, as you probably mentioned in the bio, is my academic and my clinical training is in applied behavior analysis. And generally most BCBAs work with children with autism and neurodevelopmental disabilities. And that's what I did do up until about 2021. It's like right after the pandemic hit. I have a brother who has autism, so that's how I got into the field. And I always knew I wanted to study psychology because, there's this saying in psychology, research is me search, right? We're always kind of searching for why we do what we do. But other domains of psychology really didn't do it for me because it was more, and not to say, I just want to preface this by saying that there's nothing wrong with other areas of psychology. They're great for many reasons. But there was more talking involved, less doing, and less behavior change and performance-based, like data-driven decisions. And I'm somebody who scientifically, as a researcher and a scientist, like I want to understand why something is happening, and I want to see it repeated over and over to really buy into the scientific approach that this is a method that you can go about using to change behavior, whatever that behavior, target behavior might be. And so ABA applied behavior analysis was the first domain of psychology, subdomain of psychology that really caught my attention because it did do that. Everything is operationally defined. We're first of all defining a target behavior. And I'll just throw out examples in the autism world, whether it be head hitting, if a child is hitting their head, if they are stimming, if they are maybe some verbal vocalizations or whatever it might be. We're defining those behaviors and we're taking a frequency count of those behaviors and then determining what method we're going to use to change those behaviors or to
Sure.
replace them with more appropriate productive behaviors.
Yep.
And so I liked that from a standpoint of wanting to understand behavior because we weren't just talking about it. Because a lot of times we talk our way into our problems. And in terms of athletes, like we can talk our way into worrying about what might happen. But if talk is the thing that gets us, wrapped up into psychological friction, then how do we expect talk to be the thing that gets us out of it? It's more behavior change that will, get us out of our psychological friction or any turbulence that we experience. So for me, that was really the buy-in. So a long-winded way of saying that's how I got into ABA. Then when I switched, I did a lot of my clinical and academic training. All of it was actually in neurodevelopmental disabilities. I worked with some of the most complex cases of behavior, top 5-10% of the world of severe behavior, where some of these patients and clients were a detriment to themselves and to society because it was so self-injurious or aggressive behavior. And I did that up until about 2021, like I had said. And at that point, I just became really burnt out with the medical system and the hospitals dealing with insurance and things like that. And it was really, really tough. And autism and disabilities was all I had known because of my brother and the things I had done in my training. That when COVID hit, it was, I think, like a lot of entrepreneurs right now and a lot of other people similar in this space, I just started posting stuff on Instagram, online, and a player, and I know you spoke with Will, it's interesting, a athlete, one of the hockey players from Michigan State, had seen something that I was posting. I was just posting general population strategies and tactics that anybody from the Gen Pop could use to navigate anxiety, depression, things like that. But it was strategies that I'd taken from ABA and specifically acceptance and commitment therapy and some contextual behavioral science. So I started just posting it randomly, like, waiting for something to happen, but also not expecting anything to happen.
Sure.
And one of the hockey players from Michigan State, he had been following and he had seen it and he reached out and said, hey, it was during the off season. And he said, I used one of these strategies you put up and it was really helpful. And from that, I was like, there's something here, because nobody in ABA has done this before, what I'm doing in terms of working in an applied setting with professional athletes. So I took that and I was like, there could be something here. And from there, it kind of took off where I started to post more content that I had taken from ABA from those 10 plus years of working in the hospitals and the clinics. But I just tweaked it so it applied to the context of athletes, specifically hockey players. I was very strategic and just saying I'm just going to stick with hockey. It's a very niche sport, as you know.
Sure.
And
Oh, yeah.
I found that hockey players and coaches and parents liked that I knew the lingo. Like I needed to understand the language of hockey, right? And then apply these behavioral strategies to the hockey world. And it just continued to grow from there. I had cold reached out to some players asking if they would work with me, if they would be interested in working with me, in exchange for them teaching me more about hockey. So like
Yeah.
I would them strategies and they would teach, I would learn as a byproduct. And that was probably the best thing I ever did was offer to work for free because it really helped me understand hockey and what they needed.
Yep.
And then also take everything that I had learned in the 10 plus years and apply it to hockey. So sorry, I know that was a very
No.
long-winded explanation, but I get asked so much, and I'm actually going to be on another podcast next week working in hockey, and where I'll explain it more. But I get asked a lot because it's a very unconventional
Sure.
path. And so yeah, I hit the ground running ever since, and
That's
it's
outstanding. Let me
yeah, it's
ask
been
you.
great.
Let me ask you a rudimentary question, and forgive the ignorance in asking this.
Mhm.
Applied behavioral analysis. Compare that without. I mean, what would be a major difference? So in hockey, you'd say, well, that's your mental skills coach. What would be the difference between a typical mental skills coach and or an individual such as yourself applying these? And I don't want to let the cat out of the hat. That's not what I mean about your secret sauce. Are there differences and contrasts in how
Yeah.
you treat?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a naive question by any means because, like I said, I'm the first behavior analyst that I know of so far. I've been on a hunt to find another one, but who has worked in this. There's definitely been BCBAs who have done research in with sport and health and fitness and especially strength and conditioning, but to work in an applied setting. But to answer your question, the difference is ABA is a scientific approach to understanding and changing behavior. So it's focused on a functional relationship
Okay.
between environment and behavior, between the
Okay.
variables and the stimuli in the environment and behavior. So it's identifying the relationship between behavior and the environment. And then from there, we use evidence-based techniques to improve meaningful skills and reduce unproductive behaviors, replacement behaviors, a lot of reinforcement strategies. There's something called a differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. So if a player is engaging in certain self-critical thoughts, I would implement a differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, which is an alternative thought. But the first step to all of this, which makes it different, is identifying the correspondence between environment, the variables in the environment, and behavior. So
Got
you
it.
have to do a functional analysis first before anything to identify the relationship between the two, because we can't just say, well, this player is doing X, Y, or Z because of this. We don't know, right?
Sure.
Unless it's similar to everything that in strength and conditioning is you
Sure.
have to have data. It's
Yep.
really focused on data-based decisions. So everything I do with players is always focused on data, and the data just might look different. It might be more permanent product where they have written descriptions. Their verbal description is data, right?
Sure.
Talking, thinking, that's data. We just have to have a good collection of it. So, or an abundance of it, I should say. So the difference there is that it's identifying the functional relationship between those variables. You can think all B.F. Skinner is, the father of ABA, the Skinnerian school of thought. If the easiest example or most common example is, people think classical conditioning, Pavlov and the dog and
Yep.
the meat.
Yep.
That's all. That's
Yep.
us.
Yep.
That's our people. So B.F. Skinner, he died and he was professor at Harvard, and he died in like 1990. I mean, that was the year I was born. So it was not too long ago. It was pretty rather recent as compared to other areas of psychology.
It's so interesting. And I don't want to go off on tangents here because I could talk a year off about this stuff. I told you I'm passionately curious at the onset, but it reminds me of a quote. So important is the environment. I always say this, and I stole it from a book. I don't know. I got to give it credit where it's due, and I can't remember. I think it was from the Talent Code.
Mhm.
And I took the word out and put coach in there, but I think you can. It doesn't matter. I say great coaches are a lot like gardeners. Gardeners don't grow flowers; they create an environment for flowers to grow. And I
Yeah.
think at times great, you know, coaches, doctors, physical therapy, like that environment is so it's so critically important. So
Well, it's everything.
yeah,
And
it's
I listened to both Will and Rob's episodes with
yeah,
you, and it was wonderful. And I know you had to ask them a similar question of how do you create the environment, and it is everything because it's environment shapes behavior. So the very first thing as a behavioral scientist that I look to if we want to change behavior is the environment. So that
sure,
includes all the stimuli in the environment, the variables in the environment. So from the hockey standpoint, I'm looking at even like if a player is not explosive on his first three strides, even something is simple but not so simple as like, is the ice too soft? Like what's
yep,
that? That's a
yep,
variable in the environment. The coach, the coaching staff, those are all stimuli in the environment. The environment shapes behavior. So the very first thing, and I encourage anybody, listening who works with players, if you're trying to change behavior, anybody else or yourself, to always look to the environment first and say, what here can I manipulate and change? And then from there, if you can't change the environment, then you change variables that are, there's a whole other process to that.
yeah.
But it's so true. So I'm glad you brought that up. Environment is everything.
So I listened to your podcast from a friend of mine. This is several years ago, Darren Millard, and it was an outstanding interview. And I know this is again outdated in the fact that things may change based on who you're working with, the age that you're working with. Um, what is a typical age that players would reach out to you? What's too young? And then I know it's an open-ended question, and you could probably speak the rest of the hour on this. I'm asking selfish questions. I'm coaching my little nephew this year. He's a 9-year-old, right? Um, and you know what? How do we build mentally resilient children in this day and age of social media? And I say this really respectfully. Parents, what I would consider taking the struggle, trying to steal the struggle from their kid and not letting them learn through failure. That's a big, loaded question. But how do we build mentally resilient children? And maybe I'm just being a little too tough. So I look at it sometimes and I think I don't know what it was like to be 9. I forget, my memory's like my hairline. I already forget what it was to be 9 years old. But they've got a lot more. The environment, as you would say, is a lot different this day and age. So
Oh yeah.
I'm just, again, it's a very big question, and hopefully, I'm looking forward to learning from your response.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first part of your question, which was age. So I have parents and players of all ages reach out. So
Okay,
starting from, I mean, believe it or not, like 9 years old, there's a link in my bio on my Instagram and on my website and everywhere where people can apply to work with me.
okay,
And I get applications from starting from like 9 years old up until, I mean, NHL players who are vets who are maybe like 32, right?
sure,
Now, I don't take everybody. I'm very specific about who I work with. I specifically only work with pros or players who are D1 or, OHL and going on the pro trajectory.
sure.
Not to say that a 9-year-old isn't, but to say that a 9-year-old probably isn't. We don't know.
Yeah,
It's absurd. It's
that's right.
absolutely absurd to say. I'm okay saying that because it's
Yeah,
absurd. I don't even know what I'm going to do like tomorrow, let
yeah,
alone do, let alone like determine that a 9-year-old's going to go pro. It's absurd. And so what I do is, um, kids need to be kids. It's a very important part of development, cognitively, emotional development. It is important that kids are kids. When you put stressors onto children that are stressors that are not natural stressors imposed upon by the environment or just about imposed upon by a natural process of development.
sure,
um, First of all, does a child even have the skills to process and work through those stressors?
sure,
Probably not.
sure.
And then upon, now let me say there's no parenting manual. I understand. I understand most parents are well intended. Let me just, disclaimer. This is not,
Caveats.
yeah, parenting is the hardest thing. I just need to say whatever I need to say right now so nobody gets offended. But like it's true. Like I'm very well aware that parenting, so much of my work is parents training. I
Sure.
even train still to this day, like, and I will continue to do it. Parents of NHL players so that they know how to
Okay.
respond and engage with their son. So back to the question about age. I specifically only work generally with 18 and older. I
Sure.
like to work with players who have a little bit more agency and autonomy and a little bit more verbal engagement there.
Sure.
I will sometimes take, those younger players, maybe if they're about to enter into the OHL or whatever the case might be. However, when it comes to younger than that, from a parent's perspective and children who are younger, 9 to 16, let's say for parents, it's really about what can I be doing to make the development process for my child and their process and experience of playing in hockey at a very high level. And that's not to say that you can't have goals and aspirations if they are very passionate at a young age. I believe in that. I believe you can see passion at a young
Sure.
age and that you want to aim for, for them to be a pro one day, fine. But we have to have realistic expectations and then also be very realistic in the amount of pressure we're putting on them. I mean, I just see children who are way overscheduled,
Oh,
way overscheduled. I mean, I can't believe it. The very first
it,
thing sometimes I say is like, you need to take one thing off of their, because it's crazy.
sorry, I got to interrupt because it
That's
is it is crazy. I like the amount of games kids play at 9 years of age looks like a mini USHL season. It's
And
crazy.
then they don't get home till so late, and then
It,
they have to do homework, and then they like I shouldn't be having people filling out applications where they're saying my child's 10 and they have anxiety because they're
I,
not going to bed till 11:30 and because they have so much homework because they're not getting home till late. Like I'm in
I,
bed by like 10:30. What
you
are these kids
it,
doing?
it would alarm you. Now that's the 9U level. And I'm not, because you brought this up, throwing work schedule on, but I'll give you an idea here in Columbus. If you're an 18, 16, or 15-year-old, your season ends 60 plus games, 180 ice touches, strength and conditioning, practice games. Your season ends 2 weeks later, you have tryouts. After
It's
that, you
absurd.
have spring ice. After that, you have summer ice. You know what I tell our kids at the gym? It reminds me, I say, look at what you have listed. Cut the fat off. Don't think, what can you add? What can
Yeah.
you take away?
Well, I mean, even and you don't know this from a physiological standpoint, the amount
Yes.
of stress on the body. And so, and I work with a couple MLB players as well. So I'm starting to dabble slowly into other sports, but I
Yep.
have a couple MLB players on my roster. And some of them, they're so focused on, I got to do more. I got to go to speed. I got to do this. I have to do that. And I'm like, well, let's just take a step back for a second and think about the one thing that's within your power that you can control that will maximize your gains and your strength and your power when you are, when you're on the mound, when you're pitching or when you're in the gym is your sleep. But your sleep is jeopardized by the fact that you're not getting home till so late and have all these other things to do. And so, I again, we're probably going to go off on a tangent, but the reality situation is, to circle back to the ages, is from young up until like 16, 17. I would say 15, 16. They need to be kids. Now that doesn't mean you can't have strong aspirations and standards and what have you, but they cannot be overscheduled. And my advice to parents is really to, now, to touch on as well, to piggyback off your point about the mental resilience, I think that a lot of times right now, all of us, myself included, sometimes we have this tendency to want to shy away from discomfort. We want to fix things. And so when a kid is having a bad game after a bad game, or if so and so got drafted and he didn't get drafted, or he made the team and he didn't make the team, or he has more ice time than this one, it's okay to say and repeat back to your child, to your player, that must be really frustrating for you. That probably really doesn't feel great. Instead of trying to come up with a reason, or to attack not attack, but, to really blame maybe the coaching staff or any other outside variable, instead to just say, hey, this is called adversity. In life, you don't always get your way. It's so important, because there's a little bit of a sense of entitlement that goes around in this victimhood, where I'm like, this is not going to move you forward. If you want to be a pro athlete, like, victimhood and woe is me does not get you anywhere. But what does is changing your relationship to discomfort and changing your relationship to not getting your way. So the mental resilience piece, to really elaborate on that, is it's all kind of tied together. I mean, first of all, I think this word mental resilience gets thrown around a little bit too much. And sometimes I think there's not a consistent operational definition of what that is. So for me, if it's okay, I would just give my definition, my operational definition, because if I measure resilience, which I do, and I watch my guys play every night, is, for example, a couple nights ago, one of my NHLers, I was watching him play, and mental resilience for me would be the ability to continue taking a shot even after the first, second, or third one hit the post or hit the net and didn't go in, because what it's showing me is you're not giving up. There's this consistency that you're willing to put yourself through, regardless of knowing the outcome.
Sure.
Right? Because we always want to know if it's going to go in. This is usually why shooters hesitate and they'll pass more than they shoot when they should be shooting.
Sure.
And so the mental resilience piece is about, really being able, at least as I see it from my scientific definition of it, is to get comfortable with the discomfort. And I think a lot of times players, at least in this generation up and coming, and again, this is a blanket statement. I don't love blanket statements, but the majority is being okay with discomfort, looking at a situation and saying, what could I be doing differently? How did I play a role in this? And not looking to blame outside variables, or assuming that maybe something should just be given to you, including ice time or a position or whatever the case might be.
Today's episode has been brought to you by Physical Preparation for Ice Hockey, Biological Principles and Practical Solutions, and the Gain Go Grow Manual. This is a 2-part book series exploring training the intermediate and advanced level players. Book number 1 explores training the intermediate player. Chapters include long-term athletic development, considerations, speed training, power training, strength training, and program design. The Gain Go Grow Manual explores training the high-performance hockey player. Chapters include biomechanics of ice hockey, considerations for high performers, minimizing adaptational risks while upsizing gains, the Gain Go Grow model, and example microcycles. More information can be found at Amazon.com. Interesting. I like it. I'm reading a book right now, and I'm going to butcher the title. It's called How to Create Mentally Resilient Children. And the first title of the first chapter of the book, and I'm paraphrasing, it says something to the effect of, the prefrontal cortex does not develop, and that's obviously one of the areas and regions of the brain that's logic, critical thinking, doesn't fully evolve until 2025. Until that time, young children, your parents almost need to be that prefrontal cortex, at the same time equipping you with the tools of life. And one of those, to me, like you said, is that resiliency. And he talks about as well that not allowing your children to fail steals yours. It improves your self esteem and steals your child's self esteem. So that
Yeah.
idea of failure or success is failure turned inside out, and you got to learn how to fail because that's going to lead to success. That's how you learn.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I thought it was interesting, and it brings a lot of points that you've just made about that. You
Yeah.
know,
Well, to that point, really quickly, I'll just say, I talk with a lot of like my NHL guys about self-trust, but self-trust is also your ability to trust that you can navigate adversity.
that's right. Yeah,
And that is a huge component of any player's game that I would hope that if, anybody was listening to this, they take away from trusting your talent, trusting your ability, but also trusting your mind to be able to navigate adversity and handle it. Because I think, it can be overwhelming sometimes. Like big emotions, intense emotions are overwhelming. So oftentimes the tendency is to want to avoid them. But if you can trust that you can navigate adversity, whatever that might look like, I think you put yourself in a better position for success and
excellent.
growth and growth. So.
100%. Slight pivot. Okay. Now
Mhm.
we're not speaking now with the younger demographic. Let's pivot to more pro-based athletes. Let's talk about hockey, National Hockey League. Why do players typically come to you? What would be a reason? Is it lack of confidence? Is it, hey, the coach has put me and I'm demoted down to the third or fourth line? What's a typical reason? Are there top reasons, or are players also coming to you in times of where they're on a great scoring streak? Is it just another a tool for their toolbox?
Yeah, it's a bit of everything that you just mentioned. It's like kind of like
Okay.
a melting pot of all these different reasons. Oftentimes, it's I don't feel like myself out on the ice. They maybe were a player who was drafted pretty high, or the expectations for them are rightfully so, rather high, and they're just not playing to that standard. Maybe their point production is not representative of what they're actually capable of. And so there's always a reason why isn't that happening. And it's usually because, like to everything you just said, I don't feel like myself out there. I'm just gripping my stick a little tighter. I'm worried about making a mistake because I don't want to lose ice time and get benched and all these different reasons. And then there's also too, I have a lot of guys who just come to me because they see that, I really have built as much as I don't love social media, I built a lot of my all of my business in the hockey world on social media. And a lot of these guys have seen that other players work with me. And so I think there's an element of clearly there's something going on here that can just help me optimize my game, even if nothing is wrong. Which I've had a handful of players come to me because they just say, I listened to McKinnon's interview where he talks about how he works with a sports psych, and I, want to add that in as a tool into what I'm already doing. Nothing's necessarily wrong with my game. I'm not going through a point drought. I just want to add this in. So it's both. It's there's like this thing that's going on, or there's not this thing. I just want to optimize my game.
Excellent. Again, this is a dated podcast, but I love this quote. You were talking with Darren Millard in the podcast, and you said, and I'm paraphrasing, I want to put fires out before they begin. Okay.
Did I say that?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that might be, and I'm
No, it sounds like
paraphrasing.
something. It sounds like something I would say, but I just haven't said it in a long time. But you know what? Maybe that's. I'm glad you brought it up because maybe it's important when we talk about it again. Is getting ahead of it, but getting ahead of something before it happens. So
That's,
that's referring to like the second group of players that I was
yep.
talking about. Is you know what it is? It's the best time to put out a fire is not while you're in a fire. That's not the best time to learn how to put out a fire.
Probably exactly the context that
Yeah.
you were referring to.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you want to learn how to put out a fire before a fire happens. So when a fire does happen, then you know how to put it out. And so this is also why a huge component is of what I do emphasizes off-season work. If you think strength and conditioning and what what you do with athletes and any other area of an athlete's system and all the tools that they use, it's a lot of off-season training, of course, rest and recovery. But a huge component of what I do is like we need to be working on a lot of this stuff during the off season because during the season you have so many stressors already, not to mention the hectic schedule of an 82 game season. There's so much going on. But during the off season when things are a bit more relaxed and we can really unpack some stuff and we can really, refine strategies and master them and get them as into part of your behavioral repertoire,
Sure.
right? That way, when the season starts, not only are you prepared, but you also have an edge now over other players who haven't done that. And as we know in the NHL, it's a game of inches. It's the games within the game. And so any edge that you can have over any other player is really important. So yeah, definitely learning how to put out a fire not when you're in it, but way before you even have to be in a fire.
Walk me through what it would look like. I'm player X. I play in the National Hockey League, and I am seeking your services. What is the commitment like? And then I again, and I don't know if this is still the way you're doing it. When I listened to the interview with Darren, you talked about even talking to players at some points about before the game, and after the game. You called them pits and peaks. So if I'm coming to you, what is my commitment? How long do I work with you, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so with every player, I'll say everything's always individualized. It's based on
Okay.
whatever they need. But for the OHL, AHL, NHL guys, even like the D1 guys, it's always like I'm very committed to my players, so I expect the same level of commitment back, right? Because it's like we're going all in here, and I take their playing careers very seriously. And so because of that, for me to go all in, for them to go all in, and the buy-in, it's really like we have a long-term commitment here. So it's usually, it's not usually, it is a 6 month offering.
Okay.
I've, most players after the 6 months just resign for another 6 months, but it's a 6 month container, and it's ongoing support within that 6 months. And it's the process is what any process should be for someone who's going about clinical evidence-based decisions is really first an assessment. So
Okay.
an assessment of their skills, their behavioral repertoire, um, their verbal repertoire. And when I say verbal repertoire, I'm referring to their thoughts and then also how they're speaking about themselves, because we think using words and we talk using words. Those words have a huge impact on our behavior because words are behavior. So it's a whole other area that we could for a discussion for another day. So the assessment piece, and then from the assessment piece, I determine, what do they need? If we're in season, it's like, what do we need right now, right away to put some fires out? And that's happened a few times where some players just need something right away quickly because, they're in the depths of and the throes of the season, and they should be producing more than they and they're capable of producing more than they currently are. So it's like, what do we need to do right now? And then once we kind of tame things in that way, then what strategies can we implement and refine? And then, during the off season, it's similar. It's just a little bit more not it's more relaxed, but it's equally as intentional.
Are most
Is that
players
your
for
question?
Yeah, it does. Just a piggyback question. Are most players that you work with positive self-talkers or negative self-talkers before they see you? I'd imagine,
It's a
you know
great question.
yeah, at that level, right? You're a perfectionist. You wanna master your craft.
Yeah.
I'm just curious as to the response to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes, often, they think that they're being positive, and they're not being positive, but they're also not being realistic in acknowledging where they currently are and what they've done. So let me backtrack for a second and say that, in order to move forward, it's really important to first acknowledge where you are.
Mhm.
And to your point, these are very high level performers, and they have the highest of highest expectations. Like nothing is ever good enough for them. And I don't disagree with them. I'm not here to change their thought because that's what got them here,
Sure.
right? However, I do think there's an element of to build that self trust and to build some confidence. Hey, can you first acknowledge some of the good that you've done?
Yeah.
Now, we don't have to be, we're not complacent in that. We're not saying, okay, that's it. Like, we're good. Like, no, we have a long way to go. We first have to acknowledge the fact that you've got through a lot of adversity, the fact that maybe you're producing when you're not expected to, because maybe you are expected to defensively provide for your team more than offensively, right? So there's various points there. But most of them, they don't notice that the level of self-talk is a barrier to optimizing their performance. Now, it's not irrational completely, but if there's ways to tweak it where it can optimize what they're already doing. I
Sure.
think sometimes that, not I think, I know sometimes it keeps them stuck where it's like if we just tweak some of this self-talk in a way where it's more rational and more appropriate to your performance thus far, it can optimize what you do moving forward while maintaining high standards.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Like it's a great because, like you mentioned, you're so at that level, you're so in tune with, you know.
But what's interesting? If I can just say this
No,
really quick,
please.
sometimes, and this one, like, okay, in the AHL, for example, there will be some players in the AHL who are, are waiting to get called up and they think there's other guys getting called up before them. And it's common. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes those players Again, blanket statement. So I don't love blanket statements, but just it's something, a pattern of behavior I've seen
Sure.
more often than not. It's a little bit, not like delusional, but a little bit irrational of a self-talk where they're not realizing, like, hey, no, actually, your performance does not equate to what you think it does. So their self-talk is a little bit the other way on this
Ah,
spectrum.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
like, we need to like reorient you to reality a
There you
bit.
go.
And that's why the assessment piece is so important. And really understanding the context, like context is everything. So where a player's been thus far in their career, and then the players around them too, and what they're doing in terms of production. So
Another
to go one of
oh,
two ways.
question. No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Then maybe I'm going to ask a blanket question, maybe hard to answer. How do you recommend, or what do you recommend to your players regarding social media? Like to me, I've heard players say it's poison. I'm staying off it. Get me away from it. It's the most negative thing. I would imagine that can certainly affect confidence at times. I think my narrative, like I'm on it, like you're on it. Obviously, I think it can be a very awesome tool to communicate with the world. It can also be a really dangerous tool, not just from spending time on it, but from listening to what other people that don't even know you have to say. And most of the time, a lot of the times, it's not overly nice. So, what is
Yeah.
your recommendation for players, period, regarding social media?
Well, I'm pretty fortunate in that a lot of the players I work with are pretty dialed in.
That's
So they're
great.
not even
Not
giving
even
it too much attention, right? They're
great.
really dialed in, and that's kind of nice for me because then I'm like, okay, this I do check in every now and then to be like, hey, you're not reading comments, are you? Like you're not,
Yeah, yeah.
but and they're like, no, and they're not even on. And I mean, like I can also tell if they're on, like it's because you can see who's viewing stories and things like that. So I'm like, listen, buddy, you're on a little too much. So I'm fortunate in that a lot of the players I work with are very dialed in, and that is nice. However, if to answer your question, I think that during the season, like why beyond? Why beyond? There's just so much going on. I mean, and every player, everything is compared, plays, highlight reels, like
Huh.
it's all coming out so quickly. Like you could have an awesome play, and then 2 seconds later, there's a reel put up about it, and there's not even a second to digest it. And then also there's context around that play that matters, right? I think that it can be a little detrimental when it comes to players comparing who's getting more attention, especially first star, second, third star of the night,
Yep.
these kinds of
Yep.
things.
Yep.
Like it could really, internally get to a player if they're not aware of how, because there's a lot of attention around that, and a lot of our behavior as human beings is attention maintained. Who doesn't love attention? But and attention, whether good or bad, is still attention. So I think it's just important, and this is where self-discipline comes in, where it's like choosing what you're giving attention to, choosing how you're spending your time. So I don't know. But then again, it's tough for me to say because I built my whole business off social media, which, and that's how we also, you and I and anyone else get to spread information to help
100%.
teach.
Yep.
I think it's just like with anything, it's balance.
No,
Yeah.
well put. I want to get back to a case study. Case study being the bald guy here. I'm coming to you. I've got a confidence issue. We have just signed up for 6 months. You're doing your analysis on me, and I know this is
Oh,
context
there's no
dependent.
hope. We're
Yeah,
done.
there's no hope.
So
But
I can help
but what
you.
would some tools be like? I know it again. You had mentioned this secret sauce. You draw a line. What do you gain? What do you lose? What are some ways that I'm going to try to get that confidence back as an athlete? Like I've lost a little bit of it. Is it positive self talk? Is it reinforcement? Is it cue words that I can write on my stick? Like how do I get that back?
Yeah, well, the confidence as I see it, as I would operationally define it, is not something like even when we talk about confidence. Like I always, when I work with scouts and coaches, my advice and my guidance is let's not refer to it as something that, oh, he lost it, he gained it back. He lost it, he gained it back. It's always there. It exists on a spectrum, right? It's just whether or not you're engaging in behaviors that are moving you towards confidence or away from confidence. So
I like
the
this.
first thing is like, I don't want it to be something that you have or you lose because then it puts the player in a position of, I don't have control over my own self if I don't have control over what I have or what I lose, which is this confidence, this thing we call confidence. So the second piece is I refer to it as behaviors that represent or indicators of confidence. So to the point of of what I gave this example before. If a player, passes the puck more than he shoots, but we know he's got a great shot and he should be shooting more, he's just not because he doesn't want to make a mistake because he lacks confidence. Well, the behavior to me that indicates confidence is when he continues to shoot the puck or at least go for those grade A chances, right? And then a third piece, to really come full circle and answer your question is the brain needs proof. The brain will always highlight the negative. So for you, I would say, well, if you don't feel as though you are as confident in your ability right now, let's look for pieces of proof in the past that you've done the thing before, whatever the behavior is. So we would say, what's the target behavior of the behavior that you feel not so confident about right now? And you're like, okay, well, shooting the puck, right? Well, then give me 3 times in the past where you've done that before, especially maybe with a specific system that you're running. So whatever the specific systems are that you're running, like give me 3 times in the past where you've done it before. Because then you're giving the brain proof, oh, I have done this before and I've executed it successfully. So, the brain just needs proof because it'll highlight when given the choice between going with the negative or the positive or the thing that supports us or doesn't support us, the brain will always, for some reason, it just goes to the one that, is negative or doesn't support us. I think it's really kind of stems back for survival purposes. It's a whole evolutionary thing, but really giving the brain proof of the times that you've done it before. Because there always is usually,
Yep.
right?
I really
So,
like that. I also like how you always come back to this, and I don't. It doesn't fall on deaf ears for me as just kind of a person that is fascinated with the science. I like that you always come back to my operational definition, the operational, because
always.
a
Yeah,
chance because if you don't have that, you never know what you're managing and you're changing the goalposts all the time, right? Like
absolutely.
you
Yeah.
have to have. It's one of the books I read, Measurement in Medicine, many many years ago, and it
What was
always
it
taught
called?
measurement in medicine, and it talks literally about from a subjective standpoint, psychology.
It's so important.
It
I mean, coaches. So this is something that when because I work with coaches and front office staff of NHL teams, and what I tell them and advise is we have to have a shared language, a shared mental model. Because a lot of times you'll find if there are flaws in a system or a flaws in how a player is executing a certain skill or a certain drill or whatever it might be, well, when you go, okay, well, how is he defining what you're telling him to do, and how are you defining it? And they're two entirely different definitions. So, an operational definition, and the great thing about an operational definition is that it can be whatever the team and the coaching staff decide upon for it to be. It doesn't have to be conventional. You can if we say like blue line back, like what does that mean? It so long as the entire team and the coaching staff agree upon this definition, you can see so much. You optimize the performance of the team, the culture. I know this word gets thrown around. I have a whole different take on culture, but the culture of and just the understanding. There's less friction then that is brought to bear. It's so important. Operational definitions are everything because to talk about something, we first have to know what are we talking about. Are we on, even when you ask me about something, if you ask me about mental resilience, I need to know, well, how are you first talking about mental resilience?
Sure.
Because it's not how I'm talking about mental resilience, maybe, right? So this is really important.
100%. Okay. So this is a quote I just had in my notes. The goal of the coach is to eliminate the coach, right? How do you create long term success after an intervention? Maybe someone's worked with you for 6 months. Are there lifestyle changes how do you define success from an intervention? How does it work?
Yeah, well, it's a terrible business model because I always say that my goal is to make sure that to teach them to not need me, and I'm like, this
Yep.
is a terrible business model. But to the point is, so there's a maintenance phase, right? So in applied behavior analysis, we use prompts, we use different strategies, we use a lot of prompting strategies to increase certain behaviors that we want to see more of, right? And then there's fading procedures. So these fading procedures are really important because this is how, to your point, you maintain the behavior when
Okay.
you remove the intervention. So fading procedures are super important. Applied behavior analysis is we don't conduct randomized clinical control trials. It's all single subject design where the individual is
N equals
the
one, right?
Yep, exactly. And I love that. I love that so much. It's really like I'm such a nerd, but I love that.
Yep.
But it's important because even when we're implementing fading procedures, it's to fade out the intervention so that the behavior maintains, but it has to be so specific and individualized to the person, to the individual, to the organism. And so to answer the question is that's what I would do. I would implement a fading procedure, and how I would do that or what I would do would depend upon the player, what they
Gotcha.
need, what will maintain in their environment, what makes the most sense, what has been shown, what's evidence based. And sometimes we'll do that and we'll have to tweak it a bit, because sometimes you can implement a fading procedure. And then if that player, let's say, gets traded, or if the season ends and you notice there's a change in the behavior because now it's off season, so their schedule is different. Well, maybe then we need a different fading procedure to maintain the behavior. And sometimes you have to take some steps back before you can go forward. So fading procedures are a whole thing, and it requires, a lot of, this is why I think my background and how I got here is really important, because I was put in situations clinically in hospital settings where I was on cases where I dealt with the most complex, severe behaviors, but I was very fortunate to learn from the people before me who really taught me the intricacies and the complexities of understanding fading procedures and how to manipulate them such that you maintain the wanted behavior over time when you remove the intervention. Because it's not easy. It's simple, but not simplistic.
Sure. And it's interesting, at least the way I'm seeing it now. It seems as though in professional sports, specifically hockey, is it's finally that psychological side's finally, hopefully, catching up. Like I look at these four pillars, and it's a gross generalization, right? You look at the physical aspect, building strong muscles, right? Psychological, technical, and tactical. Technical and tactical is typically on the ice. That psychological part, yes, great coaches can fan the flame of desire, but I'm talking about when you call mental injury, confidence, low self esteem. Do you feel that's finally coming to fruition in hockey, or are we many years behind?
So again, it's been 4 years now that I have gone all in on hockey and really entrenched myself in the hockey world. And what I've been told from those who have been in the hockey world long before me is that hockey is the slowest, is late to the game, a bit archaic, and if that's the case, at least it's getting there, is the way
Sure.
I see it. At least it's getting there now. I do think, I mean, even just in my own experience with the players that I've worked with and their willingness to allow me to even like post about them and post reels about them, and them when they're interviewed on big platforms, mentioning that they work with me or mentioning they work with somebody in the mental part of the game. I think that goes to show the openness and the reduction of the taboo around, working on the mental side of the game. Um, and that's wonderful. I think, there's always a long way to go. Every now and then, you get some players or um who are like, no, I'm fine. And you're like, okay, it doesn't seem like it,
Yeah.
and that's okay. I think everyone on their own time comes to accept that which used to be uncomfortable. But for my, again, I don't know if I'm the best person to ask because I'm a bit biased because I'm interacting with people all day who are all about it. Right. And it's great. So.
Another piggyback question, totally off the cuff. How do you balance in your line of profession tough love with conditional support? Meaning, like, you need to give someone, maybe it's a difficult conversation. Like, hey, yeah, you know what? A player has come to you and they're upset about something. Maybe it's warranted, or maybe how do you balance that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So there's only one version of me, and anybody who works with me will tell you, like, this is it. Like, I'm very straightforward. Like,
Yeah.
you're gonna hear what you need to hear.
Yep.
Um, and I'm very rational. Like my whole thing is, and any of the players that I work with will tell you, I'm very much about being rational and realistic. So like, yes, you might be upset about something that maybe you were a healthy scratch and he put so and so in, but like, we're not going to have a pity party here for you. Like, what can you do? What can you do? Whether that's a conversation with your coach, where you need to advocate for yourself. You need to say, hey, I noticed, I've been a healthy scratch for a couple games in a row. I want my spot back in the lineup. What do I need to do? Like, and so the balance is, I wouldn't be doing my job if I just told them what they wanted to hear. Like, I
Yep.
have to tell them what they need to hear. But what I found with at least the players that I work with, that, they're pros, they're at such a high level, that they want to hear the thing that they know is uncomfortable. So I've been fortunate in that respect. And then even the ones who maybe, are in the OHL or the AHL and they're not in the NHL yet, when I tell them the thing that they need to hear, there's a sense of relief because sometimes no one's ever really told them that before.
Yeah,
Because if you think about it, the people in the support system, it's not to say they want the best for them, they're well intended, but you got to think they have their agents, their parents, maybe a girlfriend, right? Their friends. They're telling them the thing that is going to make them feel okay, but it's not the thing that's going to, it's not solution oriented.
sure.
It's not like, here's what you need to do. So you find there's a bit of a, like a weight off their shoulders when they go, you know what, you're right. Like I needed to hear that. And that's really great because then there's an acceptance of, okay, like I need to deal with this difficult thing. So I don't know if it's so much balance as it is just a willingness. Like if you step into working with me, that the expectation is, you know, we're very dialed in. Like you're gonna hear the hard stuff, and the hard stuff is the thing that's going to make you better. So
Excellent. Want to respect your time. Where can people learn more about you? You mentioned your Instagram page.
yep.
And are there other resources that we can push you to that I can put in the show notes? Where can players learn more about your services?
Yeah, so my website's alicianaser.com or dralicianaser.com. My Instagram is the main go-to. It's dralicianaser.com or Dr. Alicia Naser is my Instagram account. I do have a free newsletter on LinkedIn. It's called Blades in Behavior for coaches. It's mainly geared towards coaches, front office personnel, scouts. And every weekly I put out a new newsletter. And then I do have my own podcast coming out soon. It'll
Yeah.
be called Blatant Behavior. Yeah, that's been in long, and everyone's like, when are you coming out with a podcast? Because I just talk so much
Yay.
clearly. So that'll be coming up. My Instagram is the main go-to, and there's a link in my bio that just leads to everything else. So
Outstanding. Our guest today has been Dr. Alicia Naser. Thanks so much for joining us.
thank you for having me.